Hi, I'm Mike Gafa, and I want to talk to you today about moving your consistory from managers to leaders. And the step here is to move from reactive management to adaptive leadership. Every day brings new crises for church leaders. Whether you're a pastor, an elder, or a deacon, if you've been in ministry any time at all, you know that there's hardly a day that goes by where some new crisis doesn't emerge. And too many consistories find themselves trying to solve the latest crisis, and it feels a little bit like leadership whack-a-mole. You know that game where you pound one mole and then another one pops up. You pound that one and then two more pop up. So I remember playing that game with my kids, and we would just giggle like crazy. Well, mostly they did, and I would laugh with them. But leadership sometimes in the church can feel that way, and that's no way to lead churches. Leadership whack-a-mole isn't it. Adaptive leadership is. So I want you to listen to this quote. It comes from Rick Veenstra, who's the regional executive for the Great Lakes region. And this is how Rick describes adaptive leadership. He writes this, that by adaptive leadership, I mean thinking about the big picture, establishing clear mission, vision, and values for the congregation, facing the facts of what is not working, creating a cohesive leadership team, taking risks, and the like. Since I believe that all congregations have only two options, slow death or deep change, all congregational leaders will need to lead change in the life of the body. This requires attention to adaptive leadership. I believe the health and vitality of the congregation depends on the willingness of the leaders to devote at least 20% of their time to adaptive challenges. I would echo what Rick says, and Rick's been in the crucible of leadership for a long time and knows what he speaks of. Rick is a wise leader, and another wise person that I look up to is Stephen Covey, who taught, among other things, an idea called the time matrix. And here's the idea. Covey said that we can divide our time in essentially four quadrants. And here we have things that are important, things that are unimportant, things that are urgent, things that are not urgent. So Covey described it this way. In quadrant one are things that are both urgent and important. So in ministry, we can think of pastoral care situations. A funeral, which no one saw coming, is an urgent situation. There's family visits, there's funeral arrangements, and it's obviously important. And so too are any number of pastoral care concerns. And there are a lot of things that fall into quadrant one that are crisis and need to be handled. But the challenge that we have in quadrant one, things that are both urgent and important, is to limit our time there. And so as a leader in the church, everything can't be a quadrant one crisis. There needs to be delegation. You need to empower other leaders. But obviously there are going to be times when we're living in quadrant one. If we go down a quadrant, in quadrant three, Covey called this the quadrant of deception, because in here we spend time on things that seem urgent but are really unimportant. So things like somebody sends you an email and says, above everything else you're doing, you need to solve this today. Or you get out of a meeting and someone says, this is the biggest thing we have going, it needs to be solved today. And you know in your mind that's probably not the case. And so that's why it's called the quadrant of deception, because we can spend time on things that seem urgent, that are really not, they're just not that important. And so here, our challenge is to be discerning. We need to be discerning leaders in order to make sure that we don't spend very much time at all in this deception quadrant. If we go over one, quadrant 4 is the quadrant of waste, and these are things that are neither urgent or important. Not urgent, unimportant things. Think about things like internet surfing, like television, surfing social media, whatever. None of these things are bad, by the way, which is why in this quadrant it's really just limiting or putting boundaries on how much time we spend in quadrant 4. That's the challenge. It's actually healthy to find outlets. We just want to make sure we don't spend too much time in quadrant 4. But here's where I really want to take you, and that's quadrant 2. Things that are not urgent and yet very important. And this is the quadrant of leadership. So prayer, perhaps, can be argued that your daily prayer life is not an urgent thing. The world doesn't end if you don't pray. But is it important? Vitally so. Praying for your congregation is not urgent, but it's important. The relationships that you have, especially the key relationships with family, maybe with your staff, with your certain church members, are important. They may not be urgent, but they're important. And the more time that we spend in quadrant 2, the more discerning we are to stay away from quadrant 3, the better equipped we are to limit our time in quadrant 1, and the better we're going to do at setting good and healthy boundaries in quadrant 4. In quadrant 2, the quadrant of leadership, it's all about investment. Time that we spend in quadrant 2 is an investment in leadership for ourselves, our families, and our churches.